Well, I know for many folks across the country over the weekend and to start this week, they are much happier because we have seen a considerable warm up from what we were dealing with, just Arctic temperatures for the last couple of weeks. But now it might even feel a little bit like spring in some areas. Let's talk about that, get an update on our weather forecast for the week ahead. Eric Snodgrass joins us for our weekly weather update. Eric, good to catch up with you. And man, oh man, I tell you what, nice to get some temperatures back above zero and considerably so in many parts of the country.
Yeah, it was. We've got spots in the middle part of the U.S. that have seen just in temperature, not wind chill or anything, but just in the temperature alone, are 80 degrees warmer than they were at one point last week. So it's already quite mild, and we're going to continue to see this. And to be honest with you, we've got a good long stretch of what we would call more mild weather on the way. In other words, I don't see in the next 2 weeks another significant cold air intrusion like we've seen lately. But the big question is, Jesse, with the mild air kind of flooding across the United States, do we bring up the moisture with it? Because from the Southwest United States to most of the plains in the Midwest, we've been very dry. The only wet spots have been the Mid-South through Kentucky, Tennessee. I mean, you guys got hammered a week ago with just rainfall amounts that across the state of Kentucky averaged 8 to 12 inches. And then it froze over on top of that with snow. But, just to kind of give you an idea of what all this kind of means, Mississippi River at Memphis has come up 30 feet in the last 3 weeks. Okay.
Wow.
So they're at action stage. The Mississippi River at St. Louis is 3 feet below low stage. And so the whole idea behind all of this pattern change away from the very cold and dry was the hope that we get into the cool or the warmer and wetter. You want to have a good wet early spring so that you have windows opening up later and you can recover some of that lost soil moisture, which we've lost quite a bit from last fall through this winter across big sections of the Corn Belt and the plains. But yeah, long story short, man, it's nice to have just some warmer conditions coming through. Just don't jump the gun yet on going after planting. Some places way down south they can go, but I'm talking about up through the Mississippi Valley, through much of the plains, upper Midwest. I would throw the brakes on this because I do see the risk of some colder air coming back again later in March and then again in early April. So we got to be aware of that risk too.
Well, and we've been talking about this drought risk also for several weeks now, Eric. And as you kind of alluded to, you look at the forecast, and I mean, there's a few clippers that could work their way through here and there, but it just doesn't seem like there is that widespread, big, significant rain event, for instance, or snow in the near term forecast. And I know that drought in the upper Midwest is still going to remain a concern here for several weeks.
Yeah, just about the only thing we could do to help it along is every one of us go to Denver, Colorado, right? And that's what a lot of us are going to do. And what's interesting is, we're going to possibly see a system next Sunday get through the Western Mountains, and it could get to the Front Range by Monday night to Tuesday. And that system is one that I think could be relatively potent. It's got all of the week 2 forecasts from the models showing wetter than average. But if it does leave, it could put some snow on the backside of it in the Colorado Rockies, could make for some really wet conditions down south. But its question is it south in Texas and Oklahoma, or is it south in Louisiana, Arkansas? And it seems to be farther to the east than anything. But I'm talking about midweek next week, the risk of severe storms for the lower Mississippi River Valley into the southeast. And Jesse, I come back to this important point here about where we have drought. 71% of the lower 48 is in some form of drought. That includes D0. If you go to D1 to D4, we're looking at like 40%. But these epicenters of drought did not get cured during winter. So we're putting a lot of pressure on spring rains. And there was something interesting that came out over the weekend. It echoes some things I've been concerned about for a while now, but some of the major storm chasers out there, the Reed Timmers of the world, he's kind of a famous storm chaser. He released his spring forecast, and he's targeting Ohio Valley, Dixie Valley, not the Central Plains. So why am I saying this? Well, if the storm chasers are in the southeast, or the mid-south, or the eastern Corn Belt, that means that's where the best flow is. That's where the biggest storms are going to be. If they're wrong, and if I'm wrong, and those storms are in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, then we beat back the drought risk in that area. But if they're all right, we're going to watch spring drought conditions spread across critical acres, and I don't want to see it. And here's what I really don't like, Jesse. in our analog package and also in some of these storm chasers analog package, they've got 2011 pinned down as a year that they're watching. Now, if you don't remember 2011, that was the year where the Mexico drought moved into Texas, New Mexico. Eventually got to Arkansas, but it hit Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado. And then 2012 was the following year. I don't like the fact that 2011 is getting talked about so much right now among meteorological circles, because 2011 was actually, I think it is the busiest severe weather year we've ever had. And most of that was concentrated east of the Mississippi River. So there are just a few things that just keep my ears perked up about the risk of where this spring rainfall could and could not be. If you ask me right now, I think if you're east of the Mississippi, you're mudding in a crop. If you're west of the Mississippi, you're going to be worried about, do I have enough soil moisture to get me through what could be a hotter, drier summer? So I know that was a lot just to chuck out there and put on your plate, Jesse, but that question you ask is very pertinent at this point. Where's drought? Where's it going? Who's been too wet? And are they going to stay too wet going forward?
Plenty of what ifs, lock and change, but of course we're going to keep tracking this as we go through the next several weeks, get ready for spring planting season. Let's talk South America. They're going through soybean harvest right now in Brazil and safrinha corn planting. What's some of the latest you're seeing there? I know we've caught up, it seems, on harvest and planting, but there's been dryness risks in parts of South America. There's been some concern. What's the latest you're seeing here this week, Eric?
Yeah, well, that has been an interesting model trend from late last week. And what I'm talking about here is, big storms came through Argentina. Mato Grosso's building back in some moisture, but Goiás, Tocantins, Minas Gerais, and Bahia, that's kind of their eastern corn and soybean belt. Models came back with a much, much drier signal over the weekend. And so we're going to have to watch it very carefully, because even though 50% of the safrinha corn crop is grown in Mato Grosso, those other areas, those are the areas that in historic past, when we've had yield problems, where the yield problems have been. And I think there is a better signal that that region stays drier longer. And if that occurs, then we've got to start talking about the chances of, well, is this safrinha crop going to be cut back on yield but made up for in production acres? That could be the case. But at this point, it's looking more like a bit of adversity on the safrinha crop compared to what we saw for the first crop of soybeans. So now I'm sitting here going, I thought Brazil was not going to give us a bullish story at all this winter, their summer. And now we're starting to see something happen as they push into this second season.
It's going to be interesting to watch moving forward here, just how this all shakes out. As we know, I'll say this, it seems like the weather patterns in South America, as we study them more and more, that safrinha corn crop and their soybeans can tend to have maybe not 9 lives, like we're thinking about wheat, but we could see this ebb and flow, it seems, and it really takes some time to figure out if there are issues or not. Am I saying that right, Eric?
You're saying that right, but there is a longer term trend that I think you and everybody listening and watching should know. And that is, if you go back to, so the monsoon typically starts to shut down at some point in late April. And then it's usually done by May, and then they start their dry season by June. If you take the historical April, May, June precipitation totals from 1940 to now, the trend line is down about 7 inches. So we're worried that some of that crop was planted a little bit late. Yeah, they caught up, but it doesn't matter. The beginning of it was late going in. I'm talking about some early possible pressure with a little heat and a little dryness in the eastern part of it. If the monsoon rains cut off at some point in mid-April versus late April, we're going to put some stress on this crop as it tries to finish. And the longer term trends suggest we better watch it. And that's why I think we could start to flip the script here, giving us something a little more to think about in Brazil. And what happens, as you always know, is that this narrative starts right when we put a crop in the ground in the United States for corn and soybeans. So I think there's something to watch down there.
Eric, anything final you are watching around the world this week?
Yeah, I mean, big thing is La Nina is past its peak and it's fading. And, historical precedents would tell me to tell you that 6 and 10 times where we get a fading La Nina, we tend to see some drought pressures in the plains encroaching on the Midwest as you get into the heart of summer, July and August. But it's not like it's 9 and 10 times, 4 times that we've seen this out of 10, it doesn't occur. So La Nina becomes less and less of a major player the farther we get into spring and summer. And that's when we start to give our full attention to the momentum of the atmosphere and that way it affects, West Coast ocean temperatures. So a lot to change in the coming weeks. But hey, speaking of weeks, we're only 3 weeks away from the equinox. So more daylight hours, get those temperatures up.
Folks can stay up to date with the weather online, agweather.com, ag-wx.com. Eric Snodgrass, thanks for joining us this week, and we will see you next week in Denver.
Sounds good. Take care.